Fueled by Death Guest.
I like to imagine, I don't know if you're recording yet, but I like to imagine that you guys are making these mugs like pottery, like Patrick Swayze, Demi Moore style.
Yes.
Oh, we need to make a video of that.
Actually, what's incredible is the company we work with, Deneen. They're all hand thrown mugs, which is crazy when we come out with like a run of like 5,000 of them.
But Jeff and I don't get like sensual about it.
We should start though.
You should have at the very least played some Righteous Brothers or something.
Oh man, you just made this company take a whole new turn, and I love it.
Yeah, I don't know, or some band with brothers in the name, if not them.
No, I like the Righteous Brothers. I like that.
Yeah. Joyce Brothers, did she ever sing?
I'm sure in the shower, right?
The Funk Brothers. Yeah,
it works.
Hanson even counts.
They do count. They don't have brothers in the name, but they are all brothers. The Bacon Brothers.
The Bacon Brothers, the Blues Brothers.
The Blues Brothers.
And of course Jonas.
Yes, and the Jonas Brothers.
I got no brothers. I got no list of brothers. The Warner Brothers.
The Warner Brothers. There we go. Oh my God! Well, thanks for being on the show. That's all the time we have. No, I'm just kidding.
Fantastic. Is it a show? It's a talk show where you just talk to people about band genres.
I love it. That's actually a good idea. I mean, hell, in the podcast universe that we live in now, if that doesn't exist already, it's gonna.
Well, in a past life, I was an entertainment journalist and film critic, and I once wrote an article about the micro genre of versus movies, like Alien versus Predator kind of things.
Whoa.
And like Frankenstein versus Dracula, but then there's Kramer versus Kramer.
Yep.
There's ones that aren't as much mashups.
That's true.
And then there's the versus genre that are like more meets. So like Billy the Kid meets Dracula or something like that.
Crazy.
Yeah, I could bore the shit out of you with all this.
That's not actually. That's crazy. That's making my mind run wild. I do want to talk about. I want to start this off by talking about congratulations about the 6-issue series and the 6-episode series, I should say, on Netflix now.
Thanks.
The Mortified Guide. It's absolutely incredible to watch this in the comfort of our own homes because some of those stories get very, cringeworthy is the word I would use. I wanted to ask you, what was it like putting that show together? Because you, as the creator of Mortified and the Mortified Guide and all of the different genres that you've been doing with it, doing this now for what, like 15 years? What was it like now thinking, okay, I'm going to create a show?
Well, I mean, that's been, I guess TV and film have sort of been on the horizon with Mortified from very early on.
Yeah.
Mortified actually was born out of the fact that I was a TV writer and I had sold a bunch of pilots and stuff, and then I went through the whole machinery of Hollywood with notes and watching your precious idea get converted into something you didn't like, and what would happen is the pilots would sit on a shelf and they would be kind of watered down versions of those pilots. And so Mortified really began out of having this idea, but wanting to do something where you're your own green light,
Yeah.
So you don't need anybody's permission. So TV's kind of always been a little bit a part of it, but and then we had done some pilots in the early days that no one has ever seen, and for good reason. And it led us to having this realization that the best way to make things with Mortified, because it's sort of its own weird beast. Like there's not, we're not a cop show set in Cleveland, but there's 5 other cop shows set in other cities.
Right.
This is like, what do you even compare this to? Yeah. So as a result, like we've realized you need to sort of make things on your own and be in control. When you have a weird baby, you've got to be a parent. You can't, anyway.
No, I think that's really, really cool. And you started talking about like the inception of the idea. Like you said, you can't really compare Mortified to anything, but now it is its own thing. Like, I mean, other things could technically be compared to Mortified. What was it like after having the initial idea and being like, okay, I want to kind of create this stage show, this podcast idea in the beginning? What was it like to do that? Were people immediately on board, or was that kind of a hard sell?
Audience members were always on board, and I would say agents or industry people who I would float it to might say, well, why would anybody be interested in people who aren't famous, or anybody who is trying to look at it through the lens of like marketing or something that is professional.
Right.
They were like, well, maybe it'll work, or what do you do after the first 6 minutes? But for the most part, people were just on board. They just got it, and they said that's really fun, and it really had no ambitions to be much more than a fun night. And then that fun night became, many.
So did you realize that this was going to be like a giant social experiment, or were you kind of more aiming to be on like the comedic side of things?
I'm sorry, I'm hung up on the idea of that of the giant social experiment, because I like that. And so, but it's not a way that I often view it. Say the second half of the question again.
Were you thinking that it was going to be like this? I don't know. It's almost like a journey into a world of, I don't know, adolescence, or just it's just exploring almost, like I said, like a social experiment. It's exploring the human psyche in a totally different fashion. Were you thinking it was going to be something like that, or were you just realizing that it was going to be hilarious and that it was going to be more of a comedic situation?
I saw it as being comedic with a lot of humanity and poignancy behind it. Like I always have liked things that capture the range of human experience. So, I don't believe comedy should always be funny, and I don't believe drama should always be serious. Mm-hmm. And so I find it really more exciting when you have things that aren't as siloed. But I ultimately saw this as a funny thing, but something that offered shades of other things. And so from very early on, that was something that pulled me in.
Cool. Where in the journey that you've taken now with this, has there been? You had a singular vision of kind of just let's put this out there into the world. Since that point, has anything surprised you? Has anything like come across that you didn't expect from starting Mortified?
Yeah, I mean, we get crazy letters from people about like how various stories have impacted them, or maybe even changed their lives. Often dealing with like sexuality and sexual orientation, and sort of coming to their own truth. But really, I've had people tell me that they reconnected with parents who they haven't spoken to, or long lost friends who they haven't spoken to, because the project sort of, as much as it's about these people who are on stage, it's really about you sitting in the audience, hearing this person, and then reflecting on your own experience. So while you were watching the Mortified Guide, or listening to the podcast, or if you're reading one of our books, or whatever that is, like, you're immediately putting it in context of your own life.
Yeah.
Like that's very common. And that's always been my favorite thing. Like I like when people immediately make it about themselves, like, and it's no longer, and that's usually stated in sort of a negative way, but I see that as a really positive thing where people are, it, you know, the art or the performance or whatever it is just a catalyst.
Cool. Have you had any
for introspection?
Yeah.
And I should clarify. Are you because we didn't really state what the show was.
Mm-hmm.
Is that something that gets stated prior, or should I explain that?
I would go into an intro before this, but please, from the creator, please explain to us what the show is. I would love to. I want to hear your words on it.
So this is the moment where I just make it up.
Yes, exactly.
Love it.
Exactly.
It's a show about outer space and all these aliens. Mortified is a show for adults. It's a storytelling project where adults share their most embarrassing childhood writings, like diaries and love letters and lyrics and whatever you wrote when you were 14 and thought you were a genius. And you share them. They share them in front of total strangers. And so we exist on stage and as a podcast and with books and the stage show, I should say, runs all around the world in 20 cities. And most recently, we launched a television series called The Mortified Guide on Netflix, which is shot at several of our stage shows all over, at least in the United States.
So cool. And with the show, I have to ask, with all the episodes that I've seen, everybody on the show, I mean, they're all normal people, but they're very well-spoken on the mic. Are these all people that have done the show before, or are they first-timers, like kind of walking on stage for the first time?
Yeah, it would have been very fun to do the TV series where these people had never been up before, but the people in the series were people who we kind of plucked because we had seen them at our stage show or heard them at our stage show and thought, oh man, this would be super fun to have. So all of these people had participated in Mortified before. Some of them are, in terms of their background, some of them are, marketing execs and teachers and psychiatrists or psychologists and, shopkeepers and whatever. And then some of them are writers. Some of them are actors or singers. And really, what their profession is, it doesn't really matter, because being, like, for instance, someone who's a comedian, it doesn't necessarily make them funnier in our show. If anything, it usually works against them, or they're too polished. But and so sometimes, like, even behind the scenes, like we were editing around that. Like if we saw someone being too slick or something, we were like, oh, that. Basically, the challenge is, it's not that we want to fool anybody, but it's that people want to believe that everything that they're hearing on stage is real. Like that's the contract we essentially have with our audience. And while everything is real, we also know that our audience will doubt it, no matter what.
Yeah.
And they'll be like, "This is awesome, but this part was fake, right?" And we're like, "No." And so, when people find out like that somebody's an actor or whatever, their first thought is somehow that it's made up, which is asinine.
Yeah.
But it's this weird prejudice and bias that I've learned audience members will have over the years that mostly just impacts our show in Los Angeles and New York, where we have a lot of people who do that for a living.
Mm-hmm.
But in Chicago or in Twin Cities or in Austin or whatever, where there's the occasional actor or stand-up, but for the most part, certainly nobody does that as their main job.
Yeah.
And most people are just doing this as a lark. The vast majority of people in Mortified are doing it because, like, it's the idea of getting up on stage and sort of, casting out their chastising, is that the word? There's a word I'm trying to think of, but
I'll take it.
expunging their their childhood demons, and sort of bearing that awkward inner child is sort of like a fun thing for people. And then there's also the curiosity of everybody. Not everybody wants to get on stage, but everybody is curious about what it's like to be on stage, and what is not everyone has the courage to actually do it, but everybody has the curiosity of like, what would it be like if I got on stage and like rocked a room, either because I'm hilarious or because I'm shredding a guitar or whatever. And this allows people who have pretty much zero talent. Like, you could be very talented and Mortified, but you don't have to be. It's all that it is you just have to be good. You have to be likable. That's your main stage quality, and you got to have some timing. But for the most part, 85% of the heavy lifting is done by the shit you wrote as a kid. Is it awkward? Is it mortifying in some manner? So yeah, and then we have producers who work with everybody behind the scenes to help them sort of edit what to share, because we're not going to put everybody on stage for 9 hours and have them read aloud every single bit of detail from their diary, because that would get boring in about 2 seconds.
Right.
Yeah. Well, I think the authenticness, if that's a word, is like the charming part about the show. The real stories from real people. But you must have had some people try and fake a story. Have you caught anybody, like any fakers?
A few times over the years, every once in a while you hear something, you go, is that real? And a few times we have, I don't think we've ever verified that something's fake, but there's been a few times where we're uncomfortable enough with it, and we try to approach it as much like journalists as we can, but where we've been uncomfortable with something to where we just don't put it in the show, or if we tried it once, maybe we don't ever try it again on stage, because we're like, we do it again, but we remove the passage that felt too questionable.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, but the reality is, kids are weird, and kids surprise you, and they write far more astute things than you would ever imagine. So that becomes a real balancing act to figure out.
Yeah.
I will say, one of the segments in the series that initially came to us, and I remember I was in the initial casting session for that night, this woman, Naomi Coe, she's in an episode called The Mortified Guide to Pop Culture, and she wrote Harry Potter fan fiction.
Mm-hmm.
And but when she read that Harry Potter fan fiction to us in the room for the first time, we were listening to it, and we had this sort of session where people share stuff, and we start to kind of figure out, could this work in our show? And my initial and as she's reading it, she says, "Oh, by the way, it's not just Harry Potter fan fiction. I wrote Harry Potter as like him and Draco and the other characters are all sort of gay lovers, and it's all very erotic sex scenes that I wrote between them." And we of course laugh because that's hilarious and ridiculous, but my radar went up. I was like, well, is this real? Because why would you write that? And so I asked her, and that's a very important part of our process is why. So I asked her why, and she gave a very legitimate reason, and that reason, a version of that reason is winds up on stage and then eventually in the TV series, and she wrote this thing because, and by the way, once we found that out, like, it transformed everything and allowed us to put her in the stage show in the first place. But it was that she was obsessed with writing fan fiction and no one was reading her fan fiction. And being a smart girl, she's like, well, what is getting read? And she realized, oh, the gay stuff. And so she was like, basically, she kind of was like a sellout, like writing about something she knew nothing about, but decide to write, what I have since learned is called dreary fiction. So it's apparently a big thing, and so she did that in order to get fans.
Yeah,
which is brilliant, I think.
Oh, yeah,
and so that makes it mortifying.
Yeah, I actually ran into something like that in my past where my mother, she's crazy. She buys a lot of weird auction stuff, but in one of the boxes that she bought was fan fiction of Spock and Captain Kirk, and it was just that. It was them being, and it came with illustrations and everything, and it was very, very vivid and quite disturbing as a 13-year-old male just breaking, into that kind of thing.
What so you've created something in the Mortified Guide and also, Mortified all of the genres. You've created something that it just doesn't exist, and you touched upon this a little bit already. With audiences sitting there listening to normal people kind of dive into their childhood writings and musings, you're immediately going to think it's fake. Comedians have taught us that. Even a comedian who gets up on stage and is bearing their soul about a story, they're punching it up. Yeah, they're punching it up for the joke, for the laugh. And so we're kind of trained to do that, but your Mortified comes from such a real place, and it's refreshing, and it's also inspiring because of what you said, getting all these letters from people and how it's changed their lives. As the creator of this and going through the whole journey, has it changed your life?
Yeah. But I certainly think it definitely makes one more empathetic. And you get to learn a lot more about people's different experiences. And that's unquestionably the best part. Getting to hear how different people grew up, and part one of that being that what's fun is that it's everyone is different, and then part two is, and yet within that they're all the same.
This whole idea of Mortified has spawned all different types of genres, and one of the ones I wanted to talk upon was the books that you've come out with, especially My Mortified Life, A Guided Journey. I think this is such an interesting thing to produce. Can you talk a little bit about that?
Yeah, it's actually called
A Guided Journal.
Yeah, exactly.
I got it wrong, yeah.
That's fine. Do you have it?
I do not have it. No, I actually saw it on your website, and I was just reading a little bit about it, and it just seems incredible, and I just wanted to hear your thoughts on that. Oh,
well, thanks. Yeah, I should try to get you a copy. It's a really unique. So we over the years we've come out with books that are anthologies of people's diaries, that are like precursors to the podcast, essentially, where it's about 85 different stories we put out. Not stories, but people's edited diaries and love letters and stuff. And for this other book, we wanted to do something really different. And for years, people have suggested you should come out with your own diary. What? And so I've been thinking, well, what would a mortified diary be? Mm-hmm. And so that's basically what this this journal is. And so it's a journal filled with writing prompts that asks you all sorts of questions about your life now, as well as your life back then, growing up. And I ask you the same exact question, and basically asks you to compare how much have you changed? Are you still the same weirdo you were when you were 14? Whether it's something as simple as what's your favorite movie right now? In the past year, what's your favorite movie or TV show or something? And why do you like it? And what genre is it? And what are some of your favorite things about it? And then going back in time and going well, what was your favorite TV show or movie growing up? Why did you like that? What genre was it? What were some things about it? And what's different about those two things, and what's the same about those two things? So you could do something as sort of almost superficial as that. But then there's things like, what's the biggest fight you've ever had? Or the best gift you ever received, and like then and now, and like in terms of like the most memorable fight, like how long, if you think about the most memorable fight you had in the past year, like who was it with, how long did it last, how did it resolve, if it resolved, did it make your relationship better, all of these things. And then going back to at some point in childhood, like what is the most what is the most memorable fight you had growing up, who was it with, what was it about, what was it really about, how long did it last, all those kinds of questions. And really determining, it helps you see, it illuminates the patterns in your life. And things that seem very different are actually, in many ways, sometimes you find connective tissue and you're like, oh, those are kind of similar. And so the idea of the book is to really just create writing prompts to help you see that. And then there's this really fun conceit on top of that. Hook on top of that, which is at the end of each of these questions, you get to rate yourself on what I call the Bowie-Betty spectrum. And that is, are you a David Bowie in life? Are you someone who's constantly prone to changing and evolving? Or are you someone who is perfect just the way you are, you never change, you're like a Betty White? And so where do you fall on this spectrum? And so you rate yourself. And throughout the book, you kind of keep doing this to determine, are you a Bowie or are you a Betty?
Wow. I think that's so cool.
I mean,
It's pretty neat, yeah.
That's like psychology at that point. That's where I start to think, like, this is a giant social experiment. It's almost a self-discovery book.
I mean, that journal very much is. And, it's everybody who I talk to about that says that, and it's like pretty much nobody knows about it. So I'm thrilled you're asking about it, because it's not easy to promote a diary, I've learned.
I'm sure.
But not a lot of press about this, but it's really unique, and it's this fascinating mechanism for learning about people. And whenever I've given it to people, I was actually at an event this weekend. I was helping somebody out at an event for addicts of whether it was alcohol addiction and drug addiction and sexual addiction, so on and so on. And so I was helping somebody at this event, and I spoke and met a bunch of the people there, and I had a bunch of the books on me, and I was, because we were talking about it, and they were all like very obsessed with it, and saw a lot of value in it for themselves, and so they all wound up buying them. And like that was not my intent in showing up. I was just sort of helping out somebody, but and so I know that there's a lot of unique qualities about it, and so I'm glad you like that.
I just think it's such an interesting thing because everybody's obsessed with where they are now and where they came from and where they're going, but it's hard to really delve into that without some sort of guide to do that. And I mean, I think that's what Mortified does on a larger scale. Is it get, like you said, you're sitting in the audience and you're hearing people talk, and that's immediately making you think, oh man, that's just like me, or
me
like,
too.
or whatever,
sure,
Yeah. And I think something like this that is almost like a blueprint to help you get there is so needed, especially in society today. I mean, we all need to understand where we came from in the crazy world that we live in now. And I wish only the best for something like that. I think it's,
thank you.
I think it's incredible.
That's like a big thing that, behind the scenes, my producing partner Neil and I speak about quite a bit, is like, how can you get that experience, like, and how can you give the experience of self-reflection through fun to people off stage, and so that it's not just for people who are on stage at a mic. And so one of those ways, of course, we believe that sitting in the audience gives you that, but we're like, well, what can what can dial that up? And so that's one of those, that's definitely one of those things. And I'd be very curious to hear your own answers to whether you think you're still that same kid you were when you were 14 or different. If you want to filling out the book,
I would love to. Yeah, it seems like such an interesting personal journey as that.
Yeah.
Speaking on that, now that this mortified culture now has coalesced into this Netflix show, and you guys are like you said, 20 cities across the world, touring with the live stage show and the podcast and everything. It went from something where people write in their journals and lock them up and hide them under their beds, never to be seen again, to now really wanting to share them and hear other people share them. Do you get a lot of that? Do you get a lot of people now coming up to you and being like, "Hey, here's this journal entry that I've got. You got to hear it."
Yes.
Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, that's been happening since moment one. Like somehow I became the diary guy, but somewhere along the way. But yeah, that happens all the time, and I welcome it. That does not annoy me. That is, to me, that's the best. It's just when, like, I just think it's funny. In fact, I even like it when I'm at a party and if Mortified comes up, somebody doesn't understand what it's about, and like they don't get that it's about childhood writings or drawings or anything like that, and they think it's just, and they don't even get that it's even about childhood. They just think it's about like stories, and so like they'll be like, "Oh, have I got one for you?" And they just start telling me about something that happened to them 3 weeks ago. I find that funny because it shows me just how people want to connect with their frailties and people want to share their stories, and I don't think that's necessarily due to vanity. I mean, it can be,
yeah.
But I think there's a pure reason behind that for the most part.
I'm sure it's therapeutic. They get to tell this story for the first time to an expert,
I guess I am, sure.
Yeah,
expert by default, man.
You've been doing it long enough.
Yeah.
Yeah, it'd be curious to see what I find myself, thinking a lot about. We live in an era of people who certainly like to talk about themselves or brag about themselves in various offices and positions in our country, and I often think like how. How this process would fare with our president or anybody else doing it. I'd be very curious.
Well, I'm happy to hear that you like hearing that, because I kind of dug something up. If that would be appropriate.
But I hate when podcast hosts do it.
I dug up. I didn't keep really well journals when I was a kid. I would start them. I used to have stacks of them, and I got rid of a lot of them because I would start them for like a couple days and then like would fall off, But I wrote a lot. I was very into prose, into poetry, and that kind of stuff. And so I dug up a poem that I wrote in seventh grade, between seventh and eighth grade.
I feel like I want to leave the room.
Hold on a second. Can I get the other members of the Can I get the members of the Mortified podcast staff to hear this poem?
Oh my God, yes. This is the first time this poem has ever been seen the light of day.
What's that? Oh, she just went to the bathroom. Well, I'm gonna put. Can you listen? Sure. So Is that cool if I do that?
That is totally fine. This is the first time this poem has ever seen the light of day since I wrote it in between 7th and 8th grade. So.
See if you can grab Joey for a second. We're going to bring out we have a podcast intern.
Oh my goodness. Oh no, I have an audience now. This is what cold feet feels like.
Oh yeah, I want you to be as terrified as possible.
Oh boy.
So,
okay.
All right. Here we go. Taking off that.
All right.
Hello. All right. So this is Neil and Joey.
Hi, Neil and Joey.
And Hadley, she's in the bathroom. She'll be here in a second.
All right.
Hi, Hadley in the bathroom.
They're dying to hear your. This is the Fueled by Death podcast.
Yep.
And they are. They're going to share. Or both of you sharing, or just one of you?
It's just me. It's just Jeff here. In preparation of having Dave on the show. And watching a lot of the Netflix series, I did the exact same thing that everybody in the audience does. I started to think about my own writings, and I started pawing through, and I found this poem, like I said, never seen the light of day. And to preface this, this was right around the time, this was between 7th and 8th grade, I would say, is when I wrote it. Is right around the time when I discovered Edgar Allan Poe. So my vocabulary skyrocketed to a lot of words I probably didn't really know how to use, but I tried to use them as best as possible. And also, this poem deals with a theme of drinking, which is odd, and I can only attribute it to both my parents were drinkers at the time. They both have since stopped and have been sober for years.
Ever since this poem.
Yeah, ever since this poem, I guess. I don't know, but so that's the preface.
Okay.
Are you all ready for it here?
Oh yeah. Oh wait, hold on. Hadley's just walking in, I think.
All right.
Come on in, Hadley. You're gonna listen to a total stranger's teenage poem.
Oh no.
Cool, let's do it.
Okay.
All right. Your audience just became 4.
All right. So hello, everybody. My name is Jeff Ayers. This is my poem from between 7th and 8th grade, and it is aptly called Untitled because, you know, I was bad at titles, apparently. So here we go. Through the drunken gloom, the dark of a man can be seen. He sits within a pocket of despair, turns his brandy over in his glass, and coughs. Reality has not fared kindly towards him, his life too rough for words. Starlight plays upon his cracked face, his shallow eyes. Happiness once flowed from them, but now lays dead. Once he was a father of passion. Also, he had thoughts instead of regrets. Time snaked its wicked way across his youth, squeezing out every last precious memory and swallowed them whole. An angel he could have been, were it not for his obsession to drink, coupled with his weak heart and broken mind. Or maybe that was the other way around. It's all the same. Angel, ... Ha! If he were one, his wings would be broken, and the feathers would be ruined and old from disuse. His halo would be rotted and mistreated, and he would grab another drink. His hell is living too long. Being 37, he wishes for an end, writhing in his stupor, brought on by the brandy, and his unkempt hair, dully catching the last rays of day, he slips unconscious. Thank you very much.
That is epic.
And what's even more epic is I just found this for the first time in years and years and years, and I turn 37 next week. So
Now you're just gonna end it all.
I think I'm gonna end it all. I think that was like, yeah, that's a good epitaph, right? Like, as I said, I had just discovered Edgar Allan Poe, who's still one of my favorite writers, but at that point, he was my favorite writer because, you know, oh my gosh, goth was all the rage at that point.
So wait, let me ask all the team podcasts here.
Okay.
Does this go in the next episode, or we're working on an episode right now?
Yeah.
It's not about drunks or poets, unfortunately. But I can see their wheels turning of how to use this.
Was this about you when you grew up one day, or was this about just some guy or what you imagined 37 to be?
I think it's what I imagined 37 to be, because I was enamored with, like, above 30. I thought that was ancient. Even when I was like 14, I thought, like, when you turn 30, you know everything. You're given the keys to Earth, and you like adult. You're given your adult card, and that's it. So 37 to me was the end of life. Like, that would just be it.
So
It's true.
This is just a portrait of the age 37, but not you.
I believe so, but again, I was very enamored with Poe at the time, and a lot of when Poe would write a lot of his like lyric poetry and stuff like that, he would kind of put on a persona, but it was always a little bit of him. So I think I was trying to copy that, where like the eyes were me, but this was like the most gothic me that I possibly could be, if that makes sense.
Podcast, our editor, who edits the podcast, I feel like she was listening to that poem and just sort of weighing like, oh yeah, this is what we keep. We cut this part. We keep this part. This line, this stanza. But I kind of like that it goes on and on and on. I kind of see a bunch of like audio cross dissolve where it just makes it for like 10 years. Anyway, we are some kids that are assigned to write their autobiographies.
Oh yeah.
Yeah. And some have to do it based on the life they've already lived, up to like 10 or whatever.
Oh my gosh.
And but also, you know what your future holds for you. And some people just want to be alcoholics, apparently, or dead,
or both.
All right, I'm gonna plug you back into my headset now. Okay, we're off.
Adios.
Bye.
I thought fun tangent.
Yeah, that was fun. Thanks for indulging me.
Yeah, thank you. They enjoyed it.
Oh, that's awesome.
That was Neil that you were speaking to.
Oh, very, very cool. Yeah, like I said, like when I was doing the same thing that you were talking about. I was watching the show and I was just like, I know I've got a box of old poems, and I just went through them actually just last night with my wife, and I found that one and I was like, oh, I gotta bring it just in case. And so that was a lot of fun. Like I said, that's never seen the light of day. One thing that we get to on this show, and is a single question. The idea behind this podcast is that we are all fueled by death. We are all put on this earth.
You should tell them it's very fitting that he has a podcast called Fueled by Death now.
Wait. I'm sorry. Neil just walked into the room and said something very funny.
What'd he say?
I know you're in the middle of asking a question, but basically, it's very funny that you wrote that poem and your podcast is called Fueled by Death.
That is true. That's crazy.
You have always been. There you go.
A self-fulfilled
That's why
prophecy.
he is who he is.
Exactly. I am still the same person I was when I was 13. Anyway, so yes, we are fueled by death, and that idea is that we all want to leave the world a little differently before we inevitably leave it for good. And we always get to the same question with all of our guests of, through your life, through where it's led you to now, doing everything with Mortified, including the show, the books, the podcast, everything else, what fuels you to keep doing it, to keep wanting to put this kind of thing out into the world?
Really, it's I think I love that I frequently get to hear new things that I've never heard before. Like I've heard lots of like diary entries of girls with crushes on boys and vice versa and things of that nature.
Mm-hmm.
There's a lot of I've heard a lot of the white kid who wrote a lot of hip hop songs, and a lot of cultural appropriation kind of stuff.
Mm-hmm. And
I think those are all very funny, but it always makes me laugh when I hear something where like, wow, I've never heard that before. And so that kind of happens. But the main thing for me, the thing that keeps me interested, and even if I move beyond Mortified, it's a thing that I intend to keep exploring, is I like the idea of making an audience emotionally react to something that's just exciting to me, like to make them like laugh if they're having a shitty day. I mean, you guys, this is what your show does. Like, I know you get mail and all that kind of stuff, and you hear from people who are into the thing that you do, and because it matters to them on whatever level, and whether it's deep or whether it's sort of surface, but like even if it's surface, it's still deep. Like it still like makes their day better, makes things tolerable, and also helps them see their lives in different ways. And so I think that's the purpose of art. It maybe that's a self-important way to look at it, but I do think I don't know. I feel like that's kind of like the purpose of like art and media, is to sort of, help you sort of reflect, and not in a gross navel-gazy way, but just in a healthy way to help you grow. And I don't know. So there's my touchy-feely answer.
I think that's great.
I like it.
So what's next for Mortified? You've spanned multiple genres. The Netflix series is excellent. Are you going to do more of that, or are you going to try something completely different? What's next?
My dream is to do a project called Mortified Planet, where we go all over the world. We made a movie for Netflix a couple years ago called Mortified Nation, and I'd like to expand that idea. Whether or not this happens or not, I don't know. Where we get to, I would love to go to other radically other countries, cultures, I should say. We get a lot of fan mail for whatever reason from Brazil. I have no idea why. People are watching our series in Brazil. Occasionally we're getting stuff from Korea. And I would love to just, I'm really driven on by this mission to sort of change people's relationship to the word shame, and what that means in their life, and through using humor to do that. And I would like to explore that all over the world, because I do believe that that's a universal thing. I think we all have self-disgust, we all have vanity, and we all have misery, and all these things. And I think it makes me feel better knowing that I'm in the same boat with a lot of people.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I've heard it explained a lot that the one thing that every human shares on this earth is suffering, and this is a great way to highlight it. But I think something like that, where you're going into different cultures, you really start to discover the boundaries of embarrassment, the cultural boundaries of embarrassment, what it means in that culture to be embarrassed, and how they might or might not deal with it. I think that's a spectacular idea.
Who said that horribly depressing phrase, by the way, though?
I think I first read it. I think it was Deepak Chopra, if I remember right. Yeah,
that sounds like, wow. It's just like bleak as shit, because
totally.
Because it's not. It's true, but it's incomplete.
Well,
like we also all share joy and other things. So.
Well, the idea is that, we go through suffering in order to relate to each other, so that suffering is not in vain. It's so that you can share that experience with somebody else and connect with them, is pretty much the idea of that. Still bleak?
Yeah, that's interesting. Yeah, no, but I get it. I get it. I just love that it's like the one thing that connects us is suffering. That sounds like one of my Jewish aunts or something.
Oh man. Well, we can't thank you enough for taking the time to be on our show. I just want to tell all of our listeners and watchers, you can obviously find The Mortified Guide right now on Netflix. Also, getmortified.com for all of your mortified needs. And but for you specifically, Dave, do you use social media? Is there a place that people can find what you're up to?
Yeah, so I am at Dave Nadelberg, and I'll spell it, but I won't spell it. You'll just Google it and figure it out.
I'll put it right in the show. Yep.
For you personally. It's Dave, Nadelberg. And so that's me on Instagram as well as on Twitter. And then we are at Mortified on Twitter, and we are at Mortified Show on Instagram.
Perfect. And I know,
but people should listen to the Mortified podcast, and they can find out all sorts of other things about the world of Mortified.
Yeah, and that is available wherever podcasts are found. And as I said before, if you go on over to getmortified.com, you can see the list of shows, all the live shows that Mortified is doing. And It's just honestly, it's incredible. The baby that you've born into the world, this mortified culture is inspiring and awesome. And I only wish you the most success through everything else that you do.
I really, on a serious note, I really appreciate it because it is not always easy growing something that's kind of grassroots. And it can often be the opposite of easy and very, very hard and depressing and all sorts of other things. So that means a lot to hear. So I appreciate it.
Awesome.
This has been Fueled by Deathcast, a Death Wish Coffee Company podcast production. Thanks for listening.